Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, open source did not destroy my creative agency. I'll explain that title a little bit more. I guess before I get started, I just want to really say thank you to Canonical for allowing me to be here. Thank you. And I want to also say thank you to my Dutch hosts. I love the Netherlands. I lived here many years ago as a volunteer for my church, and it is so good to be back. I love this place, so thank you for allowing me to be here. I'll give you a little bit of background. So I'm the creative director of Freehive. We'll talk about that in a minute. I've contributed to Inkscape, Fedora Design, Elementary, AntennaPod. Kuhn, yeah. Scale. My formal background is in architecture and marketing. So everyone loves architects and everyone hates marketers, so it balances out. Freehive is a creative agency. Like was said, I do web design, we. Web design, video animation, product rendering, graphic design, branding, yada, yada, yada. We only use free and open source software. That's why you're here. We'll talk more about that. Some of our clients have been Canonical, GNOME, Mozilla, System 76. This you might recognize. This is, hopefully, I was trying to speak to our audience. This is one of the things that we made. I just get goosebumps every time I watch it. And part of it is that video. You may not have picked up on it, but it kind of mirrors my own personal story and a lot of the stories of people here, right? You're kind of picking this thing up, this software, and tinkering with it, and it's kind of with you throughout this lifelong journey and enables you to do all kinds of incredible things. So for me, that started when I started Freehive, which it was called by a different name, but at the time, I didn't know what I was doing. Now I know a little bit more than nothing. But I had to get a new computer. I'd never freelanced. I ordered this computer online, and it's like, ooh, I can get it dual installed with Windows and this thing called Ubuntu, and I started exploring it, and it was like, this is cool. So I ordered this machine that was dual boot with Ubuntu. I can't remember. I think it was 11.04 maybe. It must have been 10.04. Somewhere in that neighborhood. I'm getting the release numbers mixed up in my head, but that was my first introduction. And then, over the years, it was kind of at that time I wasn't able to completely switch over, but it never entirely left me until about 7 years ago, so that was like 15 years ago. So several years later, one too many Windows forced reboots, and I was done with it. I'd been dual booting, and I'm like, I don't care. Forget this, Windows, you're done, you're dead to me. If I don't get home alive, please check into the people that might be angry at me for saying that. Just kidding. I'm not even going to go there. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. But the point is, something finally pushed me over the ledge, and I finally made the jump. So what's the point of this whole talk? Well, hopefully you, some of you might copy me. I just want to give away what I know, open source what I know, and so that you can learn what you like, you can take what you like, you can make it better in your own life. That's really it. So please ask questions. If we don't have time during the presentation, I'm going to be hanging around. I'll be here all 3 days, or how many more days through Sunday? So grab me and ask me your questions. I'd love to help. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? Why open source? The Creative Freedom Suite. That's my name for it. A day in the life, which will be kind of what it's like to actually do this kind of stuff, and then some lessons and opportunities. So why open source? Well, the first reason open source, it's free. And I know we have like a bad relationship with it. It's like, oh, you're only using this because it's free. Well, you know what? That matters to a lot of people. A lot of people in my industry are pirating software because they can't afford to pay whatever the well, and that's becoming more difficult because they can't afford it. But for context, I learned this when I was doing a little volunteer work for a different for Solus in the early days, and well, it was community volunteer. I was not like a formal part of anything, but I was trying to put forward ideas to maybe suggest a minimum amount to pay when you downloaded it. I'm like, oh well, you know, if you say $15. You have to anchor people at some higher value so they perceive it's of worth, and then they can donate less. And then somebody chimed in and said, oh yeah, well, you know, $15, that would be like, you know, that would be like 20% of all the money I made in a month. And I felt so bad because I'm like, I'm just this arrogant, you know, American going around thinking everyone has tons of money to throw around. So I mean, so if you think about like the median income of you know, an American, and median it's not a ton, but $3,000 a month. Well, $50 to $3,000 a month. Well, compare $50 to $300 a month. Okay, if I had to pay that percentage of my income, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be a graphic designer. It would just not be possible for me. So free is not a bad thing. You should give back. We'll talk about that later. It makes you free. So I think a lot of the people in the room here know about this, so it might be common sense, but I'll share it anyway. You know, a free license means that somebody can't take back the software. Now, when I use open source, I'm using it kind of synonymously with free and open source, free, libre, open source. There's so many names people throw at it. But the idea is that it's software that's licensed freely, and the people that create it, depending on the license, has varying degrees of, you know, basically, you can use this, I'm not going to come after you. With a free license, you can't be forced into a software subscription. Right? With a free license, you won't lose the ability to edit your own work. I mean, the first several years of my company's existence was all on software that I can no longer, I have to pay them to open my own files. So that's awesome. But with free software, that's not a problem. And free software, if somebody gets bought out, if a software application isn't commercially viable, it doesn't disappear into thin air. Now, even if we do have a problem, a maintainer loses interest or becomes busy or whatever, that's okay. Someone else can pick it up and bring it back. You don't get that in commercial software. When it's dead, it is dead, okay? So, and lastly, it's free others. This is my favorite part because I'm a cheapskate, And this is the cheapest way to make the world better. Because when I help myself and I make something better for me, everyone gets something better. I don't even have to be altruistic. It's just do something good for me, and the world gets better automatically when I make a software application better. So I like that. So I give all the benefits I enjoy to other people when I contribute to open source software. Okay, the Creative Freedom Suite, I'm poking a little fun here at the old name, the old Creative Suite. Now it's the Creative Cloud. But I'd like to call it the Creative Freedom Suite. These are some of the tools that we use. There are a ton more. So some of these you'll recognize. I hope you've heard of Ubuntu. If not, there might be some people with orange lanyards. Ask them about it. Just kidding. SyncThing is a great peer-to-peer synchronization tool that we use. Nextcloud allows us to put files up in the cloud so your clients can download them, a little bit like you would with Dropbox, but free. Like free as in freedom. WeCan, which is like Trello. I'm giving you a lot of commercial analogs, but those are all important tools for our just day-to-day production that anyone can use. On the creative desktop side, we've got Blender, we've got Inkscape, GAMP, Scribus, Krita, Table, Kdenlive. I have links in the presentation. You can download it. Go check them out if you haven't seen any of those. On the cloud side, we've got Penpot. A new one that we're using more is called Web Studio. It's kind of, in our space, you'd recognize Webflow, which is kind of a cloud-based design tool. But it's that, but open source, okay? Presentator, which is, you can probably use it for a lot of things, but you'll see later in the presentation how we use it. WordPress, you've heard of. ProcessWire, I'm just plugging this one. We do use it. It's a CMS. It's super awesome. PHP-based if you're looking for an alternative to a PHP-based WordPress. So those are some of the tools we use. I won't spend a lot of time on those. Day in the life. So let's look at some pretty pictures. This is what I spend my day doing. So I like this part. Now, I did not cherry pick. I tried not to cherry pick work. Most of these projects, were literally being worked on in the last month, okay? Some of these projects are still being worked on. So what I want to show you is how an open source workflow kind of works in the real world, what tools we're using, how we're bouncing between tools. And the Creative Freedom Suite comes into play here. So Visense is a brand for one of our customers. They do AI stuff. You probably haven't heard of them, but we do work for them. And I'm going to show you a little bit of that. Now, one of the big things I'm going to show you is that they're going to be in an expo in Barcelona, I think, next week. And then we're already looking ahead towards CES in a couple of months. So some of this is collateral and trade show material that we're working on right now. So this is their CES booth that is in production today. And I'll show you, it's a little 20 by 20 foot island booth. So this is the booth that will be in Barcelona, Spain. So if you're working with a client like this, you're going to be doing this kind of work a lot. So these are just a couple examples of the work. All right. So you might have noticed in the last one, up on the wall, let's see if I can break this. Okay, so we've got the AnyCamera Instant AI. It's a little hard on the projection, but you can see kind of a camera and this little device down beneath. So this is a free software application called FreeCAD. I didn't mention it in the Creative Freedom Suite, but we do use it periodically to bring in files from a client. Then we export that into a format that's friendly to Blender. And in Blender, we're going to do the texturing and adding labels and all kinds of cool stuff on it there. This is Inkscape. So taking that rendering, we're bringing it into Inkscape, which is kind of at the hub of all of our creative process because it's such a versatile tool, and I love using it for layout. So here it's in Inkscape. You can see the different panels. Now, Inkscape currently is not super great for print in CMYK, which with bigger brands, you have to color match. Even if the printer is going to mess it up, you need to, at least as the designer, say, hey, I sent the files to the printer with the right color mixture. So hopefully CMYK, if that doesn't make sense to you, you'll learn really quick when you have to do this work. And so we'll bring it into Scribus, and we're going to basically replace out the colors in Scribus with our exact color match values that we need, and then I'm going to send it off to the printer. Now, it's not just trade shows. We're going to be doing, this is a booth layout that we had to do for the installers. So we're doing that in Inkscape. And then this is a handout. You'll recognize similar imagery. Now, in this case, we just designed it straight in Scribus. But you'll see on there that we have some 3D visuals, right? We didn't get those online. We had to make those. And so fortunately, we have access to this incredible tool again called Blender. And so we're using Blender to create these assets that we're putting on that brochure. So it's hard to talk about my job with one tool. You can see I'm bouncing between all these tools, but they're all free and open source, and they all work together. Thunderbird, you might have heard of it. It's a really cool email client. Sorry, my deadpan humor doesn't work in front of people. Just use the laugh track or something in post so people know when to laugh. Thunderbird, awesome email client. This just came out a couple weeks ago. This is a video promoting Thunderbird. All right. Nothing. So I showed you that video because it's cool, but we're not actually going to talk about it. We're going to talk about their website. Bait and switch. I'm a marketer. So this all works together, right? And in my work, and I think in a lot of people's work, you're not just working on one project. And so you'll see here some of the visuals that we're using for that animation are going to find their way on the website and vice versa. So that's a cool thing of having access to all these different kinds of tools. So this is in Inkscape. Now, I mentioned earlier an application called Pinpot, and I think there's some Pinpot people here. It's a super cool cloud-based tool for doing this. I didn't do it in Pinpot. I'm still kind of working my way out of my old ways. But Inkscape Works is a great tool for, again, page layouts. And you can see here, if we zoom in, I've got the different states of the home page and the right side. Now, you guys are getting a secret preview because Monday, this comes out. So if you go to their website right now, it doesn't look like this exactly. Well, that menu is not there. So secret access. So some of the elements that are on the page that's being released in a few days. This visual for the add-on store for Thunderbird. Well, big surprise, that's done in Blender, right? We've got these different elements, especially because Thunderbird historically has been a desktop application and only a desktop application. Well, the reason for this new revamp is they're launching a mobile application officially. It's been in beta for a long time, and it's coming out. And so we have to kind of work that into a website and make it accommodate, people that might be coming for different kinds of things. So this is coming from the desktop page. And the little things on there, they're cool. So because we have access to Blender, it's not just about creating static visuals. You can do fun dynamic visuals, and you'll recognize some of those icons from the video that we did, right? So it all blends together. No pun intended. There's Blender. And it looks really super hard and difficult, but this is actually not incredibly difficult. Couple of weeks, you could be up and running and doing this kind of work in your creative project. Here's another visual, maybe even more primitive than the last one. So it's just a little dark day, night, dark mode, light mode visual that will find its way onto their website. And that's done simply with a gradient background moving up and down and the screen swapping out. It's just stupid easy stuff. But because the tool is there, available, and I force myself to learn it, it adds all kinds of fun possibilities to my work. Okay, Recon InfoSec. This is another completely different kind of company. They're a cybersecurity company. And so this is a different kind of trade show booth that they've got going. It's Halloween this week in the United States. I don't know who else. Do we do Halloween in the Netherlands? We recently started doing that 5 years ago. All right. I'm glad you brought the best. We probably stole it from the Brits. It's next week, the 31st, yeah. I have no sense of time because of jet lag. But this is going to be, they needed a booth that had more of a Halloween-ish vibe. And so, Chris, raise your hand. Okay, Chris does a bunch of stuff with us. He's part of the Freehive family. Let's see, I'll skip ahead. So we wanted to do this kind of Monsters, Inc. trademark. Any likeness to actual copyrighted material is strictly coincidental. All right, Disney, my contact information is at the end. So we did this kind of Monsters, Inc. themed door with their logo protecting people, protecting an office instead of monsters coming into bedrooms, right? So it's kind of fun. That's how it turned out. They loved it. Again, this is in Blender. Now, the other banner we worked on, we did that work in Scribus, but those icons are all unique, which we're designing in Inkscape. You're kind of getting a theme here, right? Oh, and you might have missed, there was a little mini TV on the table, so we did this little animated thing, really, really quick and easy to kind of get people to take a full-size candy bar. That's what they're trying to do and tie it into their branding. And oh, by the way, we can't buy assets that have their branding on it. So, that's what it looks like in Blender, and we're designing it in Inkscape, right? So all these things are working together. CRX Microtech, occasionally as a designer, you're going to be doing branding projects. This is this is actually this is a company that makes microprocessors for battery industry. This is kind of an asset that we're rebranding for a website. So when that's kind of the finished result. Now early on, it's kind of a mess like this. This is Inkscape. This is how I like to work, and it's completely messy, and I've never shown this to anybody. So, but yeah, I'm playing with shapes. They wanted the C and the R to kind of blend together, and then it kind of went into can we make that kind of more like a battery? And then so we kind of start playing with these, how do we get this battery thing out of C and R and still make it CR? And oh, by the way, okay, so this is kind of where it started going. We're playing with different fonts, and then oh yeah, but now it needs to be CRX. What? So now we had to come up with, how do we make an X work with this? But this was the final batch based upon some feedback. They ended up going with the top one. And so this is starting to play out in different areas. You can see here this is a rendering that will go on their website, another one for their website, and so forth, right? So all of this working together. David's D Company, all right. You guys kind of getting a sense for like what my day is like? It's all of this at the same time. And if you're already a designer, you know what it's like. So you're like bouncing, one day you're working on cotton candy, and the next day you're working on cybersecurity. It's just, I don't know. That's probably why I'm a little crazy. But David's D Company sells heavy equipment, right? So what did they need? Well, they needed a brochure that they could mail out to people, right? Nothing like any of the other things. Can you do this with free software? You can. I was just trying to keep the suspense. You can. I know everyone was doubting. Okay, so this is just a simple trifold. Now, we don't the doing it in 3D is not actually just for effect. It's really hard to communicate a trifold design to a customer because the way it folds, it's just not intuitive to a normal person when you see this, that it's going to look like that. And so we pull it into Blender so I can kind of show them, hey, look, well, this is what the front looks like, and when you open it up, this is all what it looks like. But I gave it away, so this is in Inkscape, because we like I said, we like doing the layout work in Inkscape. And then by the way, when we're doing an Inkscape, I can't get these photos. This is one of their photos. There's no software or no place to license this kind of stuff. So, well, what do? They want to have their service truck. Like, okay, well, this is the photo. Like, all right. So we pull it into GIMP, and we do a little magic, and that ends up on the brochure. Here we are in Blender kind of doing our mock-up. And oh, by the way, because I wanted to show you what Web Studio is, this is working on a redesign of their website. The cool thing with Web Studio is that it can tie into, so their existing website's WordPress, and it's way too much work for us to move off of WordPress. So we can just hook into WordPress for all of our front-end elements here using GraphQL. And we can build a new front-end website, and they can keep doing the back-end like they've been doing it forever. So that's kind of my little commercial for them. All right, Safeguards 3. This one I had to go a little bit further back in time because we don't do a lot of video production, but I figured, you might want to see that. So I'm not going to show you the whole thing. We'll play about a minute of it because I want to save time for questions. This is a little 3-4 minute trailer for what ended up being a 21-minute production.
But one of the things that I've realized from this is that a physical protection system, which is the collection of technology and procedures and people, all of that stuff, it's a lot like a piano. And you can't tell if a piano's in tune by looking at it. You've got to play it.
In years past, people in my position were concerned about safety, and now the issue is becoming more and more about security.
People didn't think about it before.
All right. Sorry to interrupt that. It's online if you want to watch it. But just kind of a traditional talking head video piece. How do we do that with free and open source software? Well, when we're doing really short stuff, Blender's great. Just use Blender because it just works. It's just awesome. You can't do that for a video that starts out as 8 hours of raw video, okay? So what you're looking at here, if you're a video editor, you'll recognize this mess. But if you zoom in, each of these is a spliced clip. You know, we've got we have 2 cameras, you know, so I've got my A camera, my B camera, and sometimes I'm using one or the other. I'm putting motion graphics on top. I'm using B-roll or other footage that we've captured. Earlier on, this is what it looks like. On the far right is 8 hours of raw footage with all the interview questions pulled out, all the worthless stuff pulled out, and then through multiple iterations, it moves towards that far left, which you can't really see on this projection, is this little tiny 21-minute, it's funny to call 21 minutes tiny, but relative to what you start with, it's pretty small, of the very best of the best, all brought together in a way that will tell the narrative. So that's kind of how that's working, and that's all in Kdenlive. Now, you didn't get to see it. My favorite part of the video, because I'm just kind of a sucker for motion graphics, but at the end, we did some fun little transitions, and we did those in Blender. So you can do that kind of stuff in Kdenlive, but Blender is so good. All right. Lessons. What's the point? What's the takeaway? Well, after 7 years, there are a few things that I would maybe pick 4. I just picked 4 things. So the first one, proficiency and availability matter more than features. Okay, so why is this important? The first thing I always get when I give this kind of presentation is, oh yeah, but Photoshop does this, right? Or whatever program does that. There's some feature that Photoshop does that GIMP or Blender or whatever doesn't do, right? And that may be true. I'm not questioning it. But what matters more is proficiency in the tool you're using and the availability of the tool in the first place. So if you think, well, you know, which car has had the most impact on the history of the world? Is it the Bugatti Veyron or the Volkswagen Beetle? Now, the Bugatti Veyron is an incredibly powerful, amazing, fastest car in the world or whatever car, and about 5 people own one. You know, and the Volkswagen Beetle, it's a terrible car. Probably had 30 horsepower. You know, how many of those, they're still driving those things in places, right? The availability of the car mattered much more than the sophistication of the car. That's not to say, you know, that's kind of an extreme example. I'm not saying open source tools are relatively different to their commercial counterparts, but I found that the discussion about features is kind of counterproductive, because there are multiple ways to get from A to B. And you might be able to do it in your Bugatti Veyron, but you still have to keep the speed limit. And the reality is, in a real work setting, having the tool in the first place is much more valuable. And being familiar with it and proficient is much more valuable. So this is my way of saying, you know, I know there are features, but that's not as important. Another thing I would say on the topic of features is sometimes we overstate the importance of a particular feature. And I'm an evil marketer as part of my job. And so, you know, I do this all the time. You know, it's like, oh, this widget does this whiz-bang thing. Like, oh, wow, this is so revolutionary, except you only ever use this widget once every 6 months, right? The actual impact of that feature isn't really that substantial. So, you know, if I was to say, okay, well, Photoshop, it's got a bunch of AI background removal thing, or they always do these like demos, like, look, you can make this person who's looking this way, with AI, they can look that way. And you're like, whoa, that's really cool, except, let me think, I've been doing this 20 years. How many times have I had a hard time where I needed to change the lighting on a photo or needed to make somebody look a different direction? I can think of 0 times. Sometimes it's just even useful things, removing backgrounds like I showed you. I'm doing that like once every 3 weeks, you know? So like, yeah, there's a cool AI thing, but like, I can still do it. It's not a big deal. So that's one lesson I've learned. the best tool is the tool you have. So open source is a tool anyone can have. There are no hurdles. There are no paywalls. There are no barriers. Anyone can have this tool, and they can make it work incredibly well. Money is not the only or necessarily the best way to give back to open source. You should be giving back. That's important. But I've learned from my experience that it will vary from open source project to project, whether they even know what to do with money. And so donate. If they're asking for money, they probably can use money. But don't stop there as far as thinking about how you can give back. And this is also an invitation for people who don't have a lot of discretionary money. Okay, you might be early in your career. You might not be making money with any of these tools, but you can give back in all kinds of other ways, even simple things. Providing clear feedback for a new feature, helping report a bug in a way that someone else can kind of repeat it. If you see something behaving weirdly, just spend the time to figure out, well, what are the conditions that make this thing break? And articulating that clearly is an incredible service to whoever has to go through 1 million bug reports and choose which one to figure out how to solve. Translations are important. Now, assuming you can speak a couple languages, that can do a great service to the people that speak your native language. When you have an idea for a feature and you have the aptitude, do a drawing. Show how it might work. Because a lot of developers are looking for interesting things to work on, but they don't read your mind. And having something visual can be helpful and constructive. And then even something like answering a question on a forum is a great service, right? People are working on the software. They don't need to be the ones also answering the same questions over and over. So answer the questions, be that polite, friendly face. That you have no idea how much of an impact that can have. Number 3, open source is not a perfect fit for everyone yet. And the reason I bring this up, because contrary to what I've been saying, I've been able to make it work. It's awesome. But you know, there are situations that it might be hard for somebody. If somebody's really not technically able or incredibly persistent, there are a lot of barriers. You know, even just installing things can be a barrier for people. And so we need to be aware of that's a challenge. If you're working in an environment where interoperability between commercial tools and other tools is important, it's not perfect in open source on the creative side. Now, I've mentioned those things for 2 reasons. Firstly, that we can withhold judgment from people that are struggling with it. And secondly, that we can keep these things in mind as we work towards that yet. We do want everyone to be able to use this stuff, but it's going to be hard for some people. And then the last is my open source thrives when people come first. And I shouldn't have to say this, but you know, software has technical merit on its own, intrinsically. A beautifully crafted piece of software, a technical problem solved elegantly, has merit, no doubt, but it has value when people use it. And so that isn't necessarily saying, this isn't to like make anyone feel bad because they're making open source software because they love the challenge of it. But remember that the value comes when it's out in the world and people are using it. And so there are 2 areas that I would kind of focus on there. How do we treat users? Well, few people are going to be able to make this transition into an open source workflow overnight. It's going to be starts and stops and picking it up and putting it down and over. This is how it was for me. And I think it's the case for everybody. And so we can be patient with people. We should definitely not make them feel ashamed that, oh, you're using Blender, but you're also using Photoshop. You're a bad person. Now, I was going to say we don't say that. I'm pretty sure that's been said. That's not the kind of environment that I want to come back to with somebody who's kind of in that start-stop phase of that transition. We can be accepting and kind, and that's a big deal. That really helps. How we treat fellow contributors. Now, a lot of you may work in open source projects. You understand that people are difficult sometimes. You got people from all over the world. You got some people that culturally, they like to tell you what to do. And other people that are way too passive aggressive about, oh, it would be kind of nice if, maybe whatever. Okay, you've got that axis of, that spectrum of personality. But you got other things. You've got people with different values, people with different motivations. Some people are doing it because rah open source, and some people are like, rah, I don't have to pay anything. It's really like this melting pot of motivations and personalities and cultures, and it can be really hard. And so, having worked in open source projects, this is an invitation and a beck and call to everyone, and myself included, that we can be a little bit more forgiving. We can be a little bit more patient. We're going to have to practice the forgiving reflex over and over again, because somebody's going to say something that's offensive to you, and you just go, okay, what am I here to do? I'm here to create something that we can share. And keeping your eye on the goal, the prize, we're creating something together, is a great part of open source, and it honestly is something the world could use a little bit more of. So keep people at the center. When we remember what our goal is and people are our goal, then things work out. All right, so no, open source didn't destroy my creative agency. Open source is not just for amateurs. No, open source isn't inferior in any way. When it really comes down to it, I can do my job. And not only that, open source gave me creative agency. Open source gave me access to Blender as a graphic designer that was studying architecture. I got to learn Blender. As a graphic designer studying architecture students that became a graphic designer, I got free access to a video editor. I got so many opportunities that opened up to me because it was out there and it was made freely available and it was licensed freely. And this is really, to me, the point of open source and what I hope to get out of this presentation, is that we can give people the gift of freedom. And so with that, thank you, and this is my contact information.
Thank you very much, Ryan, for that. I wonder if we have time for a couple of questions. I can bring the microphone over to anyone who has them. Yeah?
I actually have 2 questions, in fact, if I'm allowed to ask them. So
I'll answer the one I like the most.
All right. Sounds good.
Or I'll change the question.
So the first one would be, I'm currently a graduation student doing communication multimedia design, which is a lot of like digital work, but also a lot of like marketing work. And before that, I also went to which is the Dutch equivalent of community college, to do also graphic design. Mm-hmm. And what I noticed is that the tools used, it's almost exclusively in education when it comes to educating for digital and marketing.
Yeah.
Everything's Adobe. Always. It's the industry standard, and they're expected that you use it. Do you think that the adoption for free and open source tools that you've described, do you think that the reason why it hasn't been adopted widely is because Adobe is so ingrained in educating new marketeers, graphic designers, video editors?
Yeah. No, it is, and I love the term industry standard. If you want to have a product that no one questions buying, just get everyone to call it industry standard, and it's great, right? So Adobe's fortunate to be in that position. I think some work in that space is being done by commercial competitors. that are kind of breaking up that allure of industry standard. But I've thought about this problem a lot, and I think it's a push-pull problem. So I don't know if the solution, to me, when I'm looking out in the long term, I think the way to win in this is to get it into the hands of people much younger. My kids use Inkscape. And Chris is going to be presenting later today on a bunch of cool Inkscape stuff. He's got a book, and my kids read that book, and they make crazy awesome stuff. And so if one of my kids end up later in a graphic design field, they might be asking to be able to use Inkscape instead of Adobe Illustrator. And so I think getting it out there earlier helps. To be brutally honest with you, I think there's much more opportunity for freelancers to transition more to Inkscape than in-house design people. It's a hard problem. But that's kind of why I'm here. It's like there's nothing I've showed you up there that if I was to not say anything about open source, you'd question. Now, you might question the artistic merit, but you wouldn't question like whether I was a professional industry standard tool, right? And so that's part of what I'm doing, is trying to at least break that a little bit.
Do we have any further questions? Yeah.
I like the Creative Freedom Suite naming. How often do you revisit the components of your Creative Freedom Suite and change things out?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm always adding to it. So I mentioned PenPod is one I'm trying to get a little bit more familiar with. Web Studio is another cool one. You know, some of those applications that were up there have been around forever. Okay, not forever, but like in technology years forever. They've been around a long time. And so, I don't know, I guess I'm not, to be fair, I'm mostly adding. I'm not really dropping things. I might be doing more in one tool than another as time goes on, but does that answer the question?
It does, and I think your point about being proficient in something was probably why you stick with things for a long time and add rather than change.
Yeah, proficiency is really, really important, and I'm not going to pretend like it's not hard to change the tool you're using, but I think it's good practice, you know, to try new things and learn new things. But really, I was using I was using Adobe Photoshop in like the mid-90s, and it wasn't really that good back then. And people complain a lot about GIMP, but you know what? It just reminds me of Photoshop in maybe the early 2000s or something like that. There's nothing to be honest with you, there's nothing that I'm doing today that I couldn't have done 20 years ago. Once you persist in the process and you learn workflows that work, a lot of these headaches, you know, non-destructive editing and all that stuff, well, I solved that 20 years ago. It just meant I had a copy of that layer in case I needed to go back, and I just hit that layer. And so you develop the proficiency as you commit time to it. And it comes.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. I'm going to go over here just because I saw him first. I'm sorry. I know he'll be available for questions after.
Thanks a lot. So I was wondering a bit, reference to the first question, does the fact that you use open source software affect the people that you can hire, your hiring process, or maybe the clients that you get? Do people go to you because you use open source, or doesn't it really matter?
It does, yes, in all regards. So, you know, obviously, they're not teaching these tools in graphic design school today. And so I'm hiring people like Chris that have their own motivated purposes for learning it, and you can do things. One of the things that we did was, several years ago, we did the Journey to Thalio kind of interactive thing for System 76. That had like 7 different artists with different skills who are all using open source tools. And so those people are out there, there just aren't as many. So it does affect that regard. Now, as far as the hiring and not hiring, we have gotten a couple projects because we use open source. Recon hired us for that reason. System 76 did. Others might have, but I've never, to this date, had somebody not hire us, because really the client shouldn't have to care what tool you're using. When they see the work and it's good, it's good. Now, occasionally there are challenges where they're like, we'll give you the Illustrator file. I'm like, wow, I don't have one. Let me introduce you to something, you know? So, yeah.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you everyone for being here. We now have the afternoon break, which will run until 4:30. And if you come back in here at 4:30, we have a talk by Christopher on Inkscape, which will go into more detail. So can we have one final round of applause for Ryan? And yeah.